So I think the first thing I would say is if you haven't embraced flexible work, if you're still hanging on to, I've built this beautiful space. I don't understand why people aren't coming into the office. I want to be here. I want to be with them. They should want to be here. Get over it.
Hello, welcome to Commerce Talk with SmartOSC. I'm your host, Adrian Wakeham, the Regional Manager for Australia and New Zealand at SmartOSC. Today, we're talking talent in e-commerce. It's a short word, but it's a big problem for a lot of companies. So where do you look to find talented people? How do you upskill your staff? And how can you even measure talent in such a rapidly changing industry such as we have in e-commerce? So to help answer these questions and a fair bit more, we're speaking to someone who knows a thing or two about e-commerce talent. It's an honour and it's also a bit of a fanboy moment for me, if I'm going to be totally honest, because our guest today was one of the inspirations behind us even starting this particular podcast. Not only does he run an e-commerce recruitment agency, but he speaks to the brightest stars in Australian e-commerce every week on the excellent Add to Cast podcast. So thanks for joining Commerce Talk, Nathan Bush. Absolutely fantastic to have you with us. Look, let's please kick off with Nathan Bush in your own words.
And please, no fanboy, because obviously I met you really early in my e-commerce journey when you're at Power Retail, and I was always envious of all the people you got to speak to as well. So it goes both ways. So I suppose if I was just to summarize what I do, I won't bore people with the full backstory, but essentially I love everything e-commerce, and I've been around in multiple roles in e-commerce, from agency side to retailer side. I was at Super Retail Group for 6 years, heading up their digital and e-commerce, to consultancy, and now running eSuite, which has been really exciting for the past year and a half. We've been running, which has absolutely flown. So at eSuite, we do recruitment. Absolutely. We do recruitment specialized in e-commerce, and working with some of the best retailers in Australia. But part of that as well is we do e-commerce training. So for us at eSuite, it's everything about people, because there's plenty of great agencies such as SmartOSC that look after the technology and look after the marketing. But we're finding that less and less, there's not a focus on people, e-commerce people. And we know that without great people, businesses don't grow. So that's where we're trying to work. And as you mentioned, Adrian, you also run the Add to Cart podcast, which is now coming up on 200 episodes. So that's been a fun journey. Yeah. That's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, look, and again, obviously with that background, and you talked about the training side of things, I thought I might actually start us off with an observation that I've made and I've heard from other people over the last few years, for people around the industry, and I just want to see whether you've had the same experience. When we ask a lot of e-commerce veterans, and it sounds weird to be talking about people like you and me that were veterans after maybe only about 10 years or so in the space, but it's how they got into the industry. And almost everyone I've spoken to of a similar vintage or older in the space have also said that they fell into e-commerce by accident. Has that been your experience? And I guess probably more importantly, is that how it's still working today?
Certainly been my personal experience, and I think anyone who has come through COVID in e-commerce is definitely a veteran now. So you could be a veteran after 2 years, probably. So I think, yeah, absolutely. Most people are falling into e-commerce, and it was certainly my experience 15 years ago. But what we generally see is that people come into e-commerce typically from three peripherals. And I always explain the three peripherals as either coming from a marketing perspective. You see a lot of people coming into e-commerce as, hey, I can run socials, I can do great content, I can get ROI. And that is their kind of gateway into e-commerce. Or I come from a technology point of view. So, hey, I can put platforms together, I can design websites, I can make everything work. And all of a sudden, they're a retailer. And then you also get people who are actual retailers at heart and come at it more from an operational point of view. So they may have been working in traditional retail or other areas, and then they find themselves going, actually, I love the ins and outs of e-commerce. and I'm ready to run this as a store. So they're typically the three areas we see people fall into e-commerce from: operational, marketing, and technology. But I think, more and more there are more specialist positions opening up. So it's not just the typical trajectory from a, e-com coordinator to an e-com specialist to an e-com manager to a head of e-com. There are much larger teams now and specialists within that team. So whether that's UX or product or finance specific for e-commerce, it's allowing people to use skills that they may have developed at university or in other areas and go, actually, no, this is my e-commerce career and I'm going to start with this specialization.
And look, and again, obviously with yourself, you mentioned those three areas that people were generally coming into it from. So, I mean, for you personally, I mean, where were you gaining the skills and the knowledge base that you had across e-commerce? So, and more importantly, how were you upskilling yourself as you came through before you flicked across?
Look, it's one of those things that I think it was probably my biggest mistake coming over. So I went from an agency side, so an advertising marketing agency, and I got to the point where I was heading up strategy for clients, and that included a lot of e-commerce clients as well, but never actually worked in a retail business. And I came over with some great advertising and digital knowledge, and I was like, I'll apply this to this online business. But what I didn't realize was the intricacies of retail. And so I think, a lot of people lump e-commerce as digital. And we often hear people describe eSuite as a digital business. And I'm like, no, we're not a digital business. We're a retail business, if anything. And at the start, didn't understand the intricacies of retail. And I think that's an area a lot of people have to get up to speed with, because retail in itself has its own mechanisms and rhythms, I suppose, that once you start learning them, you go, oh, cool. Okay, now I can put the layer of digital and data and everything else over the top of it, because retail's its own beast. And I think that's where a lot of people need that learning curve. So I spent a lot of time with career retailers. So whether they were in e-commerce or otherwise, just having those conversations and kind of absorbing as much from people who have been in the retail industry for a long time kind of helped me get up to speed.
And I guess, and off the back of that, and we've already mentioned the C word in COVID, sort of having given people a lifetime's experience in 2 years. Now, obviously, just look at yourself and eSuite as an example. You'd started that pre-COVID. Was there a particular eureka or light bulb moment for yourself where you realised that there really is an e-commerce talent problem in Australia that could be addressed?
Yeah, I think, I was consulting basically. So I was at Super Retail Group for 6 years. Got to the end of that, did a lovely re-platforming onto Salesforce Commerce Cloud and got that. And I was like, okay, what's the next challenge? And the next challenge for me was taking that knowledge and helping other organizations develop their e-commerce, especially from an omni-channel point of view. And I was in an organization, a large retailer, a household name, and I could see, I was basically in there as leading up some core projects to help develop their e-commerce functionality. And I saw in the way the team were operating that they had some of the best in-breed tools. And we're talking Salesforce, we're talking Adobe, we're talking that kind of stack. It was a really nice stack. But then it got to simple tasks like sending an email, and no one had the capability to send an email without using an agency. And they had a good sized team, and it was costing them a fortune. And it quickly dawned on me, and I'd seen it for a while, but that was the moment, that light bulb moment that you talked about, was the moment where it was like, what's the point of having all this tech and all this marketing capability if you don't have the people who can run this and get the value out of it? So that was my light bulb moment, and that led from consulting into eSuite.
And with that, and I guess with that in mind, I mean, why was there anything that you'd sort of seen? Was it companies mistaking what was actually a talent problem for technology or marketing issues? Was that something that you, obviously you've seen it was beyond just that one retailer you were working in? But yeah, is there again another reason why you've been able to put your finger on potentially why it's gone down that way?
When you talk to marketing and tech, both of those are often positioned as almost like a silver bullet. right? So if we can get your ROI above 10 times, if we could just put this email platform in, it'll solve all our problems. It'll get us to our goals. That's how it's often seen. And people who have been in and around it, like yourself, know that there are no silver bullets, but often those are the solutions that are put up. And people are hard, right? People, it's not easy to manage people. It's not hard to attract. It's not hard to engage and motivate people. So it's often the last thing that businesses turn to when they go, oh, we're really not growing as fast as we need to, or we're not hitting the targets that we need to do, because it's easier to solve it with marketing or tech. Whereas if the great businesses out there, the ones that are sustainable and the ones that are growing, really have brilliant teams, and their leaders put so much time and effort into developing and making those teams happy.
All right, and I guess a good segue from there is in terms of around that overall recruiting and upskilling and just the overall landscape is, and I guess and we'll bring this around full circle into the training side of things as we keep going. But I mean, is it too broad a statement to say that people working in e-commerce probably need to upskill with a greater frequency than those in other industries or even traditional retail? And if so, why not?
No, I don't think it's unfair. I think that's a fine statement. And I'm not sure whether it's upskilling or whether it's just being endlessly curious. I don't think you can be in e-commerce without just wanting to know more about what's possible out there. And if you're not curious, you won't learn, no matter what opportunities are given to you. So I think it's probably more curiosity than training. But when we speak to training, though, we use the old training breakdown. It's a model that's been around forever. It's a 70-20-10 model. So 70% on the job experience, like pushing yourself into new areas, discovering new things. Anyone who's in e-commerce will know that the things you learn are probably through Google. Really, it's through trial and error. A lot of the things that you're trying to do, no one's done before. And there's not too many people in Australia who have. So we find out a lot of things by just getting in and doing and Googling and failing and working through problems that we do day to day in our businesses. And then we've got 20%, which is what we call mentoring or kind of peer-to-peer learning. So that's, things like you and I have been to conferences around the place, bumping into new people, sharing stories, having mentors, having great leaders, all those little nuggets that you get, the shortcuts in your career. If you can put 20% there, and then 10% I say is formal learning. And it's a really small part of how people learn in e-commerce is through formal learning. But if you're relying on formal learning to bring you up to speed to be the best e-commerce person, it's just not going to happen. It can definitely give you the foundations, but you've got to be really curious to go after it and get it yourself.
Possibly preempting with the same curiosity word. So the next question that I was going to have is in certainly where we look at the recruiting space, because as you're saying, there's a lot of digital recruiting agencies, and they tend to be very focused either on the tech side or the digital marketing skill side of things. What is it in your observation about e-commerce roles in particular that has made them particularly challenging for traditional recruiters to potentially try and fill?
A lot of it is what we were talking about, is that you're recruiting retailers, not necessarily propeller heads. So you really want people who understand the nuts and bolts of how this business works. And the retail model is usually a low margin game. So you can't just go out there with the best and the most brilliant ideas. You've got to have a commercial understanding of how that all comes together and what that means for the business. So I always talk about, when we talk to clients, we want to talk as retailers, not recruiters. And the team at eSuite, not to plug them, but it's, our team isn't made up of recruiters. So we could probably have doubled the eSuite team by now, if I'm honest, but we've held off because our approach is to bring people into the team who have experience in retail and e-commerce, so that when we talk to clients and we talk to candidates, it's a conversation about e-commerce first and foremost, and that jobs come after that. So for us, it's really important to be able to talk to the business of retail first.
And I guess that also comes back into the fact, around in terms of some of the challenges that might be unique to e-commerce is, and I think you and I sing from the same song sheet, as do many other people who I respect so greatly in this industry. And retail. Whether and how many people have talked about dropping the e from e-commerce, because what makes a good retailer is what makes a good e-commerce retailer. In theory, it's just the fact that the method of delivery is possibly a little bit different, and you've got different challenge, and you've obviously got some things which are unique to operating in an online sphere.
Please don't drop the E, because it'll really ruin all our websites and my social profiles. I'll have to redo everything. Don't do
it. But again, are you seeing it? Because again, you sort of got, when you're talking risks and challenge, there's risks and challenges sort of come in equal measure, and you've got risks as a staff member who might have been thrust into having to work on the e-commerce store. And if they, if either they don't continue to upskill, they might have come in with a certain level and they don't continue there. They've got that risk there. The business itself also has the risks of not making sure that their staff are upskilling along with the pace of change, which is in some cases meteoric. To sort of throw another word in there. But yeah, again, other than that, are there any other particular risks that you think people should be aware of for either the staff or the company? And likewise, extending that risk are there any particularly e-commerce unique challenges that they need to be prepared to face?
Retailers usually being in industrial areas where it's a culture shock for a lot of people coming from other industries. No, look, I think there's shiny object syndrome, I think, is one of the risks, because retail can be repetitive. We talk a lot about year-on-year results. We talk a lot about squeezing as much as we can out of what we've got. There is the shiny object syndrome that can come in and really take focus off what you're trying to do for a business. So I've seen a lot of people get wrapped up in new concepts and new ideas, which are absolutely fine, and think that this is the brand new retail. This is the 100% of the way of the future. There is no other way that we will ever be shopping online than online. And in social shopping, NFTs, whatever it is, all will have a place at some point, but they won't replace the overall model. And I think there's a lot of people who get caught up in that and thinking that retail needs to be reinvented, but it doesn't. It just needs to be evolved. So I think that's something that people can get distracted by, especially if you come from a background, especially that digital or tech background, and you want to move stuff a lot quicker. And because we get caught up in that kind of notion that, why wouldn't you shop online? Like, that's our world, right? We shop on, like, we build websites, we show how easy it is to shop online. Why the hell are 85% of people still shopping in store? It doesn't make sense. Surely that's got to stop. That's going to fall over at some point, but it's not, because we are a certain segment of society that are so ingrained in e-commerce. It doesn't mean that all our customers care about e-commerce as much as we do. Even though it's great. Now, it will continue to grow, but there's room for everything. And I think if you dismiss all other channels, such as the power of a physical store, then you get wrapped up in your own world, which isn't representative of customers. It's actually funny, speaking on Add to Cart to a lot of founders in e-commerce, the thing that I hear the most is that people saying, I actually don't like shopping online. And these are people running e-commerce businesses. But they, the thing that's made them successful founders is that they look at the world through a retail perspective, and they understand that just because it's not them, they need to understand their customer, not how they experience it and what they think the future is.
Yeah, well, and I mean that's a really interesting point, especially because you're talking about, especially those coming in from the marketing background, where it's all about how do we squeeze, how do I get $10 out of the poker machine for every dollar I put in. Sorry, Mark Bartzer, stealing your line there.
And he'd come back and say, it's only $5 now.
It's only 5 now. He would come back and say that, but that's all. It's all very new customer acquisition focused, and then you've got all those who might have come from from the loyalty and rewards program side, who it's all about, where it's all about,
Yeah.
customer retention.
Yeah.
Customer retention, who are saying, oh, well, it costs so much more money to find a new customer than most to keep the existing ones happy. And how do you play that against a lot of the promotions and the sale, and the big sales narcotic that we know retail globally tends to get swept up in.
You must see a lot of that actually as an agency who are working with multiple partners in different areas for one retailer, where everyone's going for the marketing and everyone thinks their area is the most important. How do you balance that with your clients?
And yeah, it's often in some of the companies we're working with, it's who can actually get in the ear of the CEO most, in terms of what needs to prioritize. But yeah, it's a really interesting point, because you often come across, even doing discovery, and anyone else out there in agency land running these types of discovery workshops would come across exactly the same thing. And what the marketing department thinks is going to be a successful project is going to be very different to what the IT team thinks is going to be successful, versus exec management versus the warehouse versus the customer service team. And it often isn't until you actually get them all together in a room and actually ask them to put out what do you actually want this to do, and you realize just how far apart different business units are.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's where you've almost got to strip it back and say, okay, well, what's the business rationale behind you doing this, as opposed to just, hey, our biggest competitor just went headless, we have to go headless, without necessarily understanding why. To take something else that is trendy. So and there's so many different facets in it.
It just reminded me actually of one of the great lessons that I got one time from a boss that I had. It was like, I had this idea for a customer self-service portal which had information and content all coming through it, so that customers can actually be engaged with a brand that they haven't been so attached to. And my boss said, okay, that sounds all good. And this was in my very early days, so I still had a very marketing, advertising hat on. Can you go away and do a business case for it? I'm like, yep, no worries. Did it all. I was like, okay, cool. This is the website we've got to design. It'll cost this much. We might need a little bit of content. This will be this. Great. Here it is. And he went, okay, cool. So what technology do we need? I'm like, good point. All right. So I went back and did that and said, okay, cool. So what will this do for us? I was like, okay, well, it's going to increase sales this much, customer service this much. He's going, okay, cool. So if we increase sales, where's that product coming from and who's handling that product? I'm like, oh, cool. I've got to go speak to the warehouse and the supply chain guys. Great. And then he comes back and goes, okay. And then obviously we're selling this much product, then there's going to be an impact on customer service. What's the impact? What have you factored in there? I'm like, good point. So I had to go over the customer service and work with them. And then it flows on right through the whole organization to the point where you're speaking to the CFO, the COO, everyone else to go, this impacts everyone. Even though this is a marketing or an advertising idea at the core, if it really hits our goals around what we want it to do in terms of customer engagement and sales, it's going to impact everyone if it's successful. So it's, you can't just look at it down that one lens.
Yeah, which and again, I think that sort of brings, and let's bring that back around now to the training, to the training aspect of it. And obviously something that I know is incredibly near and dear to your heart and has been for a long, long time, even way before eSuite, from our conversations over the years. So and again, so we look at, for example, again, plug for your eCommerce accelerator program, but the idea in there is how are you seeing that? I mean, would the e-commerce industry benefit from a more universally accepted skills benchmark? And I'm talking the idea of standardization here. Again, because obviously you've got the companies, their partners, and the individual employees are potentially impacted by that. So, and you can extrapolate that out as well. Does having that would that skill standardization ultimately benefit the consumers who are going to be shopping from these retail stores?
It's an interesting question, and it's one that I've never actually been asked before. So I love that you put it forward. And I think my answer is no. I think that if we standardize e-commerce, we're actually doing ourselves a disservice.
Mhm.
one of the things that we work through with the accelerator, and it's one of the very, very first points that I make in week 1 with our students, is that this course, even though it's a foundations of e-commerce over 10 weeks covering everything from finance to tech to marketing to supply chain and more, is that I'm not going to teach you everything about e-commerce. It's like I want to give you the foundations, but the foundations is foundations in terms of teaching how to think and analyze, rather than teaching you every nook and cranny of e-commerce, because the boundaries are constantly changing. The way we do things are constantly changing. You're never going to know everything. I think there are definitely some areas of e-commerce that you have to have an understanding of, and they're mainly around the legal side of it and your obligations around data and things like pricing and promotions, and understanding, don't screw this up, because there are
Yeah.
regulations and there are things you've got to
Yeah.
follow.
Yeah.
But I would say on top of that is that as long as you understand the fundamentals of how an e-commerce business works and the levers that you have available to you, it's up to you to make the most out of them. And I don't think there's a playbook that you can follow that will work for every business and every person.
So, would it be? And again, this is coming back to your 70-20-10. I mean, this is obviously you're talking the 10% in terms of
Yeah, it's a
of the
bad
skills.
business model, isn't it? When I put it like
Yeah,
that,
it is. You should flick it around, mate. Flick it around.
That's right.
How do you work on start doing it in store? Take people in and get them up and down ladders in
That's right.
in warehouses and merchandising stores at Christmas time and Halloween.
Yeah.
But would it be safer to say, rather than standardization is the wrong word to say, but is it more like setting a foundation or a benchmark?
Yeah.
Because and I'll throw something else at you. Is I heard another person much smarter than me say in a presentation he was giving a couple of years ago, and he was talking about the fact that best practice won't necessarily be best practice for your retail brand, because just because it works for this person, they might even be in the same niche as you, selling to the same types of customers, selling the same product, but what works for them won't necessarily work for you. But you've obviously got to draw a line somewhere to build upon.
Absolutely. Yeah, we call it foundations, and that's what we try and put in place, because you're absolutely right. Is that what works for one retailer won't work for another, and don't try and copy your competitors. Try and do better than them. Analyze it, and if you've got those foundations, that gives you the ability to think more creatively and to come up with options rather than go, cool, nail, hammer, let's do this, and try and go through without thinking. Because what's the most frustrating question for an e-commerce business owner? It's, what's my conversion rate? Well, what should my conversion rate be? Because no one can tell you. And that's the answer. Everyone goes, oh, cool, it should be 3%. That's what they want. But you can't, because every business is different. Every customer is different. If you try and standardize things like that, you're not going to push yourself to get the best results that you can.
And I think, and I guess this is also potentially where some of the challenges come across there as well. Because again, if you're coming in as a marketer, you can be tertiary qualified in marketing. If you're coming in from the tech side, you've got, you've done degrees in computer science and programming and all these other sorts of things, which sort of build into it. You can do, you can go, you can get CEO training, in terms of the things which are teaching you at that end there. So, and again, sort of flicking it back in, for retailers who are saying, okay, well, how do I do this to make sure that I'm bringing in people that have this baseline level of knowledge, short of just looking at a CV, or if they've come in from some of these other areas. I mean, would you say that, should this be driven by any particular part of the industry? Like, should it be driven by the retail associations? Should it be driven by, should it be self-regulated by the retail industry itself? Or is it something that, again, goes back in through the educational institutions? Or going through private organisations like yourself?
No, look, I think we have a part to play in it, but we're not the answer. I don't think anyone's the answer, if I'm totally honest. Like, you and I both know a lot of the e-commerce leaders in Australia who don't have tertiary qualifications. They don't have any formal qualifications, but they are bloody brilliant at e-commerce and have built billion-dollar businesses. in e-commerce, but they don't have that formal training. And I don't think we want to get to a point where you go, to be in e-commerce, you've got to do course A, qualification B, and this C. Like, there shouldn't be those things to get into e-commerce. Like, we've never been in a time where it's easier to have an e-commerce career if you are curious and driven. You can start a Shopify site in 10 minutes if you really want to get in there and know how an e-commerce site could work. So I think there are roles to play, and like you mentioned, there are specializations in retail and e-commerce. So whether that be data, whether that be pricing, finance, promotions, whatever it is, you can absolutely go do those specializations. And I think they offer a hell of a lot of value, and bring them back in to help educate everyone around you. But I think we're going down a slippery slope if we start trying to put not hurdles, but qualifications in front of people who want an e-commerce career. I think the best ones are the ones that can prove that they've got the drive and the curiosity to be successful.
Yeah, and I think, and I guess it's part of that. It's part of that unstructured beauty of it, and I think where we look at where a lot of e-commerce has come from, not just in Australia, I think globally, is e-commerce has come out of a very entrepreneurial, fail fast, which is which is a phrase which I think has deservedly fallen out of favour. Fallen out of favour in the last couple of years. Talk to anyone in the buy now pay later space, for example, at the moment. There's but then it's clashed again with these traditional big retail businesses which have become very corporate in their nature and a lot of that structure. And again, and you're going to hate me for saying this because I've just noticed while we've been chatting and because you've been on camera, for someone who follows the Canberra Raiders and follows New South Wales in rugby league, you look so much like Cameron Munster at the moment, who is known for that unstructured, who has that very unstructured, but brilliant way, and he makes it work. But by their own admission, gets a ball in their hand and doesn't even know, he doesn't even know what he's going to do. And I think you come back to some of these fantastic e-commerce practitioners who, again, sort of didn't come out of this, but have managed to build these incredible businesses and incredible ecosystems around them. So I've got to ask myself the question: why have you started with this e-commerce accelerator? Because all you're doing is
I'm not doing a good job, am I here? No, I always think it's better to be honest and truthful, but we absolutely see a role for training and not qualification, but training and development in e-commerce. So where it all started was that Em and I started eSuite recruiting, and we knew that if we didn't help play a role in bringing talent through e-commerce and broadening the pool, it's a very Paul Greenberg. He taught me a lot around that way of thinking is, broaden the pool, make the pie bigger. If we don't help make the pool of talent bigger, then we're going to be shuffling the same people around the same seats in e-commerce in Australia. And that's not good for anyone. It's not good for us, not good for retailers, not good for the candidates. So we wanted to play a role there. In the area that we saw an opportunity is that moment that you go from university into your first job. And so there's some great degrees out there, whether that be marketing, business, finance, whatever. But there was no way. How do you get into e-commerce for your first e-commerce job? You kind of fall into it. It's the conversation we were having before.
Yeah.
So we're like, if we can take graduates who are coming out of university and give them like the skills to be up to speed with how retail works across all facets of it, and a few hands-on skills around running a platform and being able to use analytics, when they come into a retailer for the first time, they're actually going to be useful, because we had retailers putting their hand up going, we want junior talent, but we don't have a lot of time to train them up. So they better be bloody good when they come in. I'm like, well, that doesn't kind of work. So this way, our vision was that let's give them a foundation. So when they come into their first retail job, that they can immediately add value. We launched it and we got some students signed up. And then we had retailers calling us up going, love the look of this program because we want to get our whole team on the same page. Basically, it's that foundation conversation. We want our merchies to understand how e-commerce works. We want our project managers. We've got people in stores that we think are superstars that we want them to have a pathway into our e-commerce team as an e-commerce coordinator. Can we put them into your course? I'm like, oh, actually, that's a really good idea too. So now we're, that's our focus, is to help retailers build that pool of internal talent, e-commerce talent that they can drive through. And if they never have to use us again as recruiters, then that's fantastic because they've developed their own pool of e-commerce talent and help their people develop their own career.
So so if you're a company and looking to upskill your current staff within the e-commerce, and so you're saying their priorities should be to sort of come in, on the e-com side, is you're saying start with the analytics and the basic digital marketing piece, or to get an understanding of a platform. And I mean, what would you say would be the higher priority?
So we always talk about, understanding all elements. So the way the course works is that 10 modules, starting with an overview of the market, moving into understanding how to map a customer journey, into finance, into tech. So you kind of build up, but right at the start, you choose one retailer to work on, and every week you dive into that retailer's business. And at the end, you've got to pitch an idea. Which is a new idea. And we had some brilliant ideas come through this one, all from, hey, let's make inclusive sizing, to new packaging, to customer service portals, to all sorts of stuff. It was fantastic. AR fitment, all that sort of stuff. And it makes you think from all angles. But the other part of it is that we have partnered with Shopify on the last one, where our students have access to the Shopify platform, and it doesn't matter if you're not from a Shopify business, it's just to get hands-on with the back end of a platform and understand things like how to upload product, how to add product details, how to run promotions on site. And then we also give the opportunity to do a Google Analytics course, which has become a lot harder now with GA4 because there's not a lot of, Google haven't designed their new GA4 course. But I think if you can go in with that understanding across those fundamentals, plus being able to be hands-on with analytics to find the insights and do some basic tasks on a storefront, you're going to offer value straight away.
Okay, beautiful.
How does that, what do you think? Do you think that from what you see in clients' businesses?
Yeah, well, I just say, I mean, you look at that crawl, walk, run, and I think probably maybe on the B2B side is you probably still got a little bit of people who have been thrown into, okay, we need to digitally transform. We've got customers asking us now for this, or where, the reason why we need to build a B2B transactional B2B portal is because our competitors do it, and we're being asked for it when we respond to tenders. There's all sorts of thought process on the business to consumer sites. They tend to already get this, but yeah, it's more about individual business units trying to jostle for importance in terms of, okay, well, this is the bit, you've got to put more focus on the shiny front bits, where you've got marketing driving, driving the project. Whereas if it's from IT, is to say, no, I need to, I basically just need to make sure that all of this works, because I this is the capability of my in-house dev team, and they don't know how to do this, so we need to make sure we can lean for that. So yeah, it's more about how do we, it's more prioritizing. Because they're all valid. Every viewpoint is valid. Is to say, well, you've got to strip it back and say what's going to make the guy that's actually signing the check at the end of the day happy. And is it,
or girl?
Or girl? Yep, it's guy or girl. Sorry, Peter, you can edit that bit out later. In terms of whoever's going to be responsible for that. So it's it is changing, and it's still, I mean, we still talk about e-commerce as it's new. It's only been around for 30 years, but it's still seen as a new way of doing retail, and we sort of see different manifestations of it, and where it's driving people.
Yeah.
back into stores. And we saw that the moment lockdowns ended, all of a sudden, everyone rushed back into store again because they could.
Mm. Mm.
And I know I was one of those, and I
Yep.
realized after spending half an hour in a shopping mall all the reason why I'd been shopping online. Because you don't have to fight for car parking when you're sitting at your desk. But again, there are certain things that even to this day I won't buy online. Not because I can't. I just prefer to go into
What are
store.
they?
And uh, look, I mean, definitely. Oh, for me, shoes. I
Yeah.
tried to I bought some shoes earlier this year, and it took me 4 attempts from 3 different retailers to eventually get this shoe in a size that actually fit me.
Yeah, right.
Because I'm one of those pesky people that has one foot not quite the same size as the other.
Ah.
So, but
I
I
thought
didn't
you were
learn
gonna.
that
I
until.
thought you were about to say you're a sneakerhead or something.
Oh God, no! I'm not cool enough for that, Nathan. No. But no, I was just trying to get a a, a pair of shoes that I had originally been into store to buy, but they'd sold out. And they sent me and they actually looked it up. Again, hey, let's link all of our in-store and online inventory together. So big ups to them for that. But then they sent me to the only other store that supposedly had it in my size, and they tried it on, and it just hooray for inconsistent shoe sizes. Um,
It's like, and that's the thing too about retail, right? Is you come into it, and I don't want to focus on anything in particular, but inventory is so important. I always call inventory the backbone of any retail business. And coming in from the outside, especially if you come from that marketing side or that tech side rather than the operational side, if you come from marketing or tech, you don't know the first thing about inventory and inventory management. But if you don't get that right, no sale that you do, no great tech advancement that you do will ever lead to a happy customer outcome.
Oh, absolutely, and you still see it, and you still see it so much now. Is you're
Mm.
understanding sort of what your staff set up, and they say, oh, what do these two guys do, or girls? This guy, this girl. Oh God, I did it again. It's just like, oh, what do they do? Oh, they sit. Their job is purely just to consolidate
Mm.
our retail POS and our online inventory,
Yeah.
which is not in real time, and it's like, okay. You don't have a system that does it. Oh, we've tried. Oh, it's really expensive, and it's like, yeah. Well, what are you paying for these people? Who
Yep.
I don't imagine they're getting the job satisfaction out of doing data entry. I'm sure that
They might not be sitting on those seats for too long.
No. So, but yeah, but again, it's all part of the fun and games,
Yeah.
which
Makes sense.
is this beautiful industry. So, hey, that's almost bringing us to the end. So we're not going to let you go before asking, as we always do for all of our guests, as some. Let's wrap it up into some nice little takeaways. Would you have your 3 top tips for any company who's looking to hire new staff for their e-commerce division? What would you say are probably the biggest things that they should focus on where it comes to needing to add muscle to their team?
All right. So I'm not going to go airy fairy here. I'm going to make it pretty practical. All right. So I think the first thing I would say is, if you haven't embraced flexible work, if you're still hanging on to, I've built this beautiful space, I don't understand why people aren't coming into the office. I want to be here. I want to be with them. They should want to be here. Get over it. Because even if you like working that way, the first question that we always get asked by candidates now is, how often do I have to be in the office? And it doesn't mean that they don't want to be in the office, is that they now know that to do their jobs and to do their jobs effectively, they don't need to be in the office all the time. So, and I think a big part of that is, don't think of it as people are lazy and they want to work in their pajamas and they just don't want it. People want to make the most of their time. That's what they're thinking. So if working in the office for 2 days a week while the whole team is there is an effective use of the time, can justify traveling half an hour on a bus or a train in the morning, absolutely they will do it, because they know they'll get bang out of their workday. It's not a laziness, it's a effectiveness through around that. The second one is you've got to pay well. And I don't mean paying overs every time. You don't last 12 months in terms of salaries and expectations. We find we get the best results from understanding where the absolute top tier is that people are willing to pay, and then working down. So it's not so much going, this person has to come in at 85K and that's it. It's like saying, this is the experience we want. For the absolute right person, we'd go to 100, but it could be anywhere from 70 to 100. And just being flexible with that based on experience and being able to have those honest conversations with people is really important. And the third thing, I think you've got to be able to tell your story. So it's no good now being the biggest retailer, turning over millions of dollars with 200 stores and brand names, and go, look, beating your chest and going, look how big we are, look how good we are. Why wouldn't you want to come work here? You've got to tell the story of the why. So we're finding that when we're putting opportunities out in market that have a real story, whether that be a sustainability story, a founder that people go, oh, I love the way that she works, I really want to work under her, or a team culture that they've built through social, and they've already told that story, it's so much easier to get people through rather than going, huge head office, you'll love it, there's huge career opportunities, we're turning over billions. That story's not resonating as much anymore. People want real meaning in their work.
Awesome. All right. Well, look, I think on that note, we might draw things to a close. Wanted to again extend a very, very warm thank you. Incredibly grateful for you giving up your time to join us today, Nathan. Yeah. Look, again, last chance here for if you want to give anything a plug, how people can find you and connect with you away from here. Please, here's your not as if you need another 30 seconds of fame, but we'll give it to you anyway because you're well deserving.
Thank you, Adrian. Oh, it's always good to catch up with you, mate. I really appreciate your time. Look, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm always on there. Nathan Bush, you can connect on LinkedIn or visit esuitetalent.com.au, where we have all our jobs and our training programs on there.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. And and again to that, thank you very much, listeners and viewers, because I know there's a lot of you on YouTube these days. Scary thought. But thank you very much. Please give us a like, subscribe. You know the drill. We all ask the same thing. If you like the podcast, please tell people about it. Get them to join. And even if you didn't like it, come back for the next one because who knows, it'll be even better.
There'll be a better guest than Cameron Monster next time. So come for the next one.
There's a reason why I'm wearing a maroon jumper, mate. So no, that is all good. But thank you very much, everyone, and bye for now. Take care. Bye.